Cognitive taxonomies. Various models for cognition are used to increase our comprehension of how our children think. Understanding the differences between these models and their possible applications can inform our decisions on how to approach curriculum design. The most popular and the original of the educational taxonomies was Bloom's taxonomy. Developed by a committee led by Benjamin Bloom in 1956, Bloom's taxonomy has been a cornerstone of American educational thought. It is most often represented as a pyramid with the lowest levels of cognitive thought as its base. The fundamental idea behind this taxonomy is that one must progress through the levels of the pyramid from the bottom up to achieve the highest levels of thought. Unfortunately, we've seen throughout many studies and throughout education that students rapidly leap between all of these levels of the taxonomy. One of the bonuses of Bloom's taxonomy is when you're writing a lesson plan, it gives you a process with which you can work from the bottom up that allows the students to grow accustomed to perceiving knowledge in a certain way. Of course, the negative aspects of leading the students through a process of knowledge, comprehension, application, and so on is it leads them to believe that that is the only process, the only means through which approaching information. And it doesn't encourage them to experiment with approaching the information with a way that's most interesting to them. If you just allow them to experience the information, allow them to approach the information on their own terms, then they might attempt to analyze it as a means of developing comprehension. They may attempt, and every student is going to be different. And approaching this taxonomy so clearly through its process, in a lot of ways is limiting the creativity of the student. In 2001, Marzano approached information in a very different way. And what I like about Marzano's taxonomy is its acceptance of how the information relates to the student. You will recognize several of the phases of Bloom's taxonomy at the very bottom of the chart. Both the recall of information, the comprehension of information. Whereas with Marzano, he moves on to take the information and relate it back to the student. Most importantly, in the establishment of efficacy, a person's perception of their own competence in relation to the information, as defined by Albert Bandura, the notable social theory psychologist. So what's really great about Marzano's taxonomy as a foundation for our curriculum is that it goes hand in hand with developing an independent learner, because it allows them to develop a relationship with the knowledge above you are expected to know this information and I'm going to ask it of you on a test. And if you do not know it at that time, you will receive a failing grade. Marzano's taxonomy allows them to develop an understanding of the information that allows them to make it personal and to see how it adds value to their life. And once they have that, the idea that they are going to A, comprehend, and B, retain the knowledge for a much longer period of time is significantly increased. So that is the primary reason why we'll be using Marzano's taxonomy over Bloom's as a model for this new music education curriculum. Objectives and focusing questions. Objectives are short-term goals that allow you to achieve larger curricular benchmarks. They can be either behavioral, cognitive, experiential, or critical. Focusing questions encourage critical thinking and help the students connect the knowledge to their lives. Any discussion of objectives needs to start with a brief mentioning of Ralph W. Tyler's work in 1949 on the Tyler rationale. The Tyler rationale was a collection of thoughts that influenced curriculum development throughout the second half of the 20th century. And it had 5 primary points, which were: what educational purposes should the school seek to attain? What educational experiences can be provided that are likely to attain these purposes? How can these educational experiences be effectively organized? Can we determine whether these purposes are being attained? And how could a school or college staff work on curriculum building? The effect of the Tyler rationale is hard to estimate because it started what is really now known collectively as educational lesson planning. Before the Tyler rationale, lesson plans weren't something that teachers used. That is, they didn't sit down and think through the process, the steps with which they were going to share knowledge. Ever since 1949, when the rationale came out, it has been universally accepted that this is the right way to teach, without a lot of studies to really prove that this is how students best learn. In fact, it is contrary to how children learn. Children learn by interacting with society, by interacting with things, by interacting with people, and experiencing in an environment in a social, cultural way, as Lev Vygotsky would have told us. And this idea that knowledge has to be given in steps, instead of learned either holistically or through shared experience, is something that hasn't really been proven. But that being said, all formal discussion of objectives are based upon the notion that this stepwise process is correct. In order to align with some traditional value, to give it some sequence, any new curriculum should start with an understanding of some objectives. So the students aren't sent into educational whiplash, if you were, from a drastic change. I also propose that as we move into education over time, we slowly move towards something that would focus more on critical thinking, focusing more on focusing questions, which I will discuss later, and will allow the students a broader, more holistic understanding that is less locked in by an educator's preconceived notions of what the students are going to learn in the process. Because with a real constructivist or critical classroom, the teacher doesn't know in advance what knowledge is going to be learned, because the students are constantly influencing what is being taught, which is limited if you focus on the objective, something purely locked in. This also looks into the method of understanding by design, which is kind of the next extension of that. Literally, education, understanding by design, developed by Wiggins and McTighe, gives the idea that through backwards design is when you take your final end goal and you start with it, and then you develop the program in reverse so that you know that the steps you've created takes you to an end goal. That backwards design prevents the students from being part of determining what is the end goal. So although it is educationally efficient, if you're trying to give very specific pieces of information, to use this method, to use a formal lesson plan, a very behavioral modeled objective lesson plan, it is not efficient if you want the students to feel more invested in the creation of their own knowledge and thereby create the lifelong learning that the school district espouses. So, although I will be discussing objectives and how they can be utilized in a future model as students become more functional in a 21st century style of learning, a model in which that allows for more openness.